Podcast.
Washington Journal continues.
On this National Constitution Day, we're joined once again by Jeffrey Rosen, President and CEO of the National Constitution Center. And Mr. Rosen, I want to start with something that Mitch McConnell said on the Senate floor yesterday at the start of the day. He said, quote, "This second attempted assassination of Donald Trump should provide a moment of soul searching for all Americans and reflection about the ways our political process has been injected by reprehensible violence." Is there any lesson that we can take from the U.S. Constitution in this moment as we reflect on what happened 2 days ago, what's happened this election cycle?
Well, it's absolutely true that the whole point of the Constitution was to test the proposition, as John Jay said in the first Federalist paper, can a republic be guided by reason and conviction, not by force or violence? And the founders recognized that republics are fragile, that in history many of them fell to violence or demagoguery, and it's urgently important to maintain the Constitution and the rule of law. That's the one thing that stands between us and violence. It's what's made us the greatest republic in the world for nearly 250 years. And all Americans, regardless of their political background, must embrace the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
So we showed viewers a Gallup poll in our last segment showing that a record low percentage of Americans are not satisfied with the way democracy is working in this country. Back in the 80s and 90s, double the amount of Americans, more than 60%, were satisfied with the way democracy worked. Is it a failure of the system? Is it a failure of the Constitution that we're at the point that just 28% of Americans say they're satisfied with how this all works?
The question of trust in government has divided people ever since Hamilton and Jefferson debated it at the founding. Hamilton thought citizens had a responsibility to confide confidence in government in between elections and give it the power to achieve a strong military and a strong economy. Jefferson thought that citizens should question government and always use liberty to challenge power. So the fact that people are not sure about whether to entrust confidence in government is not new. We are more polarized than at any time since the Civil War, according to scholars. And we know that in the Civil War, the Union broke, the war came. So it's important to take seriously the lack of satisfaction of citizens. But it's not that, but it's the Constitution that holds us together, not that brings us apart. It provides a platform for the constructive exchange of views. The Constitution is made for people of fundamentally differing points of view, as Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said, and therefore it's especially at times of declining trust in government that it's important to rally around the Constitution.
I don't have the data on this, but do you think that lack of trust, lack of confidence in the government, this polling question, is it correlated, do you think, with people's understanding of the United States Constitution? Did we have a better understanding, appreciation of the Constitution back in the 80s and 90s when those numbers were higher? Do we have less of an understanding of the Constitution today, asking this question on Constitution Day?
That's a really good question. And first of all, happy Constitution Day. It's so exciting.
Same to you, sir.
On September 17th, we're so looking forward to an amazing day of celebrations at the National Constitution Center, and it's great to start the day with you. This is a time of declining trust in all institutions, and there are lots of reasons for that, including social media and polarization. But it's a really interesting question about whether there was more confidence during the founding because of civic education. And there's no question that almost all the founders, starting with George Washington, thought that it was urgently important for citizens to learn about the Constitution, in particular the principles of liberty that it embodied, and also the habits of deliberation that it made possible in order to keep the republic. And they thought without that civic education, the republic would fall. So, and this is, as you started with the Annenberg poll, a time of declining knowledge in the Constitution, and therefore there may be some connection between the lack of civic education and the lack of confidence in our institutions.
It's Constitution Day, asking viewers to join this conversation with Jeffrey Rosen on Constitution Day, President and CEO of the National Constitution Center. C-SPAN viewers know him well. Phone line split as usual for you to call in. Democrats, it's 202-748-8000. Republicans, 202-748-8001. Independence, 202-748-8002. Jeffrey Rosen, as folks are calling in, if they're in the Philadelphia area, what will they find at the National Constitution Center today?
Friends, you must come by the NCC. It's going to be so exciting. So we start in the morning at about 9:30 with a naturalization ceremony. And out of all the things I have the privilege to do, there's nothing more inspiring than being part of a ceremony of the naturalization of new citizens. It just brings a lump to the throat and just a deep sense of how grateful people are to become new citizens in America. And then Justice Neil Gorsuch will be joining us all day. He's the co-chair of the National Constitution Center, along with Justice Stephen Breyer. And he'll be here for a town hall with students at 11:15 or so, and he'll answer their questions. And then at 1 o'clock, we're going to launch a new Constitution 101 course with Khan Academy. It's so exciting. This is Khan Academy's first intervention in the civic space. We've co-produced the most exciting Constitution 101 course with America's top constitutional scholars and historians from all perspectives with the basic principles of the Constitution. You got to check out the link and take the course yourself, C-SPAN viewers, because you'll learn so much. I did. There are questions. It's challenging and exciting, and it's all free. And it's just a game changer in civic education, we believe. And then in the evening, Justice Gorsuch will be back, and he's talking about his new book, Overregulated. And we're going to have a great conversation there. So come live if you can't make it to Philly. It's all live streamed and online. Check it out and let the light and learning begin. It's going to be a great day.
Constitutioncenter.org, of course, is where you can go for all of that. I should note that conversation at 11:15 Eastern, we're also going to stream live on C-SPAN's homepage at cspan.org, so plenty of ways to watch and interact. And give us a call tomorrow on the Washington Journal. Let us know what you thought of the program. So we hope you join us throughout the day. Jeffrey Rosen, though, with us this morning for about the next 35 minutes and taking your phone calls on Constitution Day. I know you were listening in a bit to that conversation we had in our first half hour this morning about how people would change the Constitution if they could propose an amendment. I wonder what stuck out to you from that conversation.
Well, first, that it was such an informed and vigorous and thoughtful conversation. There's nothing like C-SPAN viewers to present diverse perspectives about constitutional issues. It's inspiring to hear how engaged people are. One thing that jumped out was the gentleman from New Jersey who proposed 3 changes to the Constitution, ending the debt ceiling, stalemate, and also amending the Electoral College were among his suggestions.
And his third was getting money out of politics.
That's right, and which would require overturning the Citizens United decision. Interestingly, those proposals were included among those offered by a series of liberal, conservative, and progressive teams that the National Constitution Center convened to propose constitutional amendments. And I think the progressives proposed a Citizens United amendment, and both the conservatives and the progressives were open to amending the Electoral College, interestingly. So we convened all 3 teams for a virtual constitutional convention, and what emerged blew my mind. It was so surprising and so inspiring. The teams agreed on 5 amendments to the Constitution. Who would have expected that these people who so strongly disagree, conservatives, progressives, and also libertarians, leading scholars in all camps, agreed on 5 amendments? Should I share what the 5 amendments are?
I hope you do.
Well, I will. Here they are. First, term limits for Supreme Court justices, 18-year term limits. Second, making amendment a little bit easier. Third, making impeachment a little harder in the House, but easier to convict in the Senate. Fourth, eliminating the natural-born citizenship requirement for the president. And fifth, eliminating the legislative veto. Before the Supreme Court struck it down in the 1980s, Congress could say no to executive actions by majority vote, and our teams would resurrect that to reinvigorate Congress. So fascinating that none of these amendments involve hot-button cultural issues like abortion or religion. They all have to do with the structures of government. And what's so significant is that all 3 teams wanted to amend or mend the structures of government, not start from scratch or burn the whole thing down. None of the teams, not the progressives or the conservatives or the libertarians, thought we should break up with the Constitution, or the Constitution was failing, or that we had to start from scratch. Instead, they thought that by tweaking these governmental structures, we could create a more perfect union. Really inspiring civic exercise.
Making amendment to the Constitution easier. Remind viewers what that process is and when's the last time the Constitution was actually amended?
The last amendment that was recognized was the 27th Amendment in the early 1990s. That had originally been proposed as the original in the original Bill of Rights, and it prevents Congress from raising its salary without an intervening election. It was ratified by some states and then lay dormant. And then a student, Gregory Watson, discovered the amendment, suggested in a term paper that if a few more states ratified it, it'd become valid. He failed his paper because his teacher thought the idea was outlandish. And then he had a national movement. The amendment was recognized by the archivist, and I think the grade was changed. So that's an amazing story. And the reason that there have been so few amendments is because it's very hard to amend the Constitution. There are two ways to propose amendments. It can be proposed by votes of 2/3 of both houses of Congress, or by a constitutional convention convened by Congress at the request of 2/3 of the states. And then it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures, or by special constitutional conventions elected in 3/4 of the states. And as a result of that, we've just had 27 amendments.
Plenty of callers for you, Jeffrey Rosen, this morning. Joining us on Constitution Day, this is Carl, Gaithersburg, Maryland, Republican. Up first. Go ahead.
Hi, Jeffrey. I just wanted to thank you very much for your book. I met you briefly at the Gaithersburg Book Fair last summer, and as a result of your talk, I read your book, The Pursuit of Happiness, and was made aware of the moral philosophers of Greek and Roman times. And I have been going through the books as you suggested and having a great time, and it's really a good touchstone for me. So I just wanted to call in and thank you very much for writing the book. I thought it was excellent. And if I could make one more comment about what I would change in the Constitution, is I would ban the practice of a continuing resolution, that I would make it a constitutional amendment that Congress must stay in session until they pass a full annual budget at one time and do away with continuing resolutions.
So interesting. Thank you so much, first of all, for reading the book. It was great to meet you in Gaithersburg. I'm so honored that you were inspired to read the books yourself. And that's the whole point, as you know, is just to inspire all of us into a life of deep reading and learning and daily reading, ideally. And you can learn so much from those sources that inspired the founders. And ending continuing resolutions is a really thoughtful suggestion. It's very much in the spirit of those structural suggestions that would require Congress to do its job. And let's put that on the list.
The Pursuit of Happiness, How Classical Writers on Virtue Inspired the Lives of the Founders and Defined America. For folks who haven't picked it up yet, what's the pitch for it?
The pitch is that this reading project changed my life. During COVID, I set out to read the books of classical moral philosophy that inspired Thomas Jefferson and the founders when they wrote that famous phrase in the Declaration of Independence. I spent a year reading Cicero, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, as well as Enlightenment philosophers. And what I discovered is that for the founders, happiness didn't mean feeling good, it meant being good, not the pursuit of immediate pleasure, but the pursuit of long-term virtue. And by virtue, they meant self-mastery, self-improvement, character improvement, being your best self, using every moment of the day to use your powers of reason to moderate your unreasonable passions or emotions so you can achieve the calm tranquility that defines long-term well-being. And the takeaway for the project, as I mentioned to the gentleman, was in addition to changing my understanding of happiness, it just changed my daily reading habits. And now, ever since doing this unusual reading project during COVID, in the morning when I wake up, I have a rule, which is that I'm not allowed to browse or surf until I've read books. I've got to read for an hour or more if I can. And I got back into the habit of deep reading that I've fallen out of because of my addiction to these screens that are ruling our lives. And you just learn and grow so much. It's totally transformative. So I'm so happy that the gentleman who called in also felt inspired to read the books. And C-SPAN viewers, all of you are readers and learners. I know you are because you're so engaged with with democracy and with politics. Let's all rediscover the radically transformative power of deep reading.
What did you read this morning?
I read a collection of essays. It's called Shakespeare in America, and it's these primary sources that include, it started with a letter with John Adams to John Quincy Adams, fearing that Hamilton and Burr would take over the Republic like Caesar on horseback, and then quoting Julius Caesar. And Adams thought that we can learn, it's an amazing takeaway from this letter. Adams thought we can learn from Shakespeare's history plays the fact that politics divorced from principle degenerate into violence. Isn't that amazing? Just to start off with the question that we began this show with, you asked what is standing between us and violence, and Shakespeare's lesson, according to John Adams, which is also the lesson of the Constitution, is its principle. It's the principles of the Declaration, the Constitution, that keep us from degenerating into violence. And that was just from a skim of this book, a half hour I got up for C-SPAN. It doesn't take a lot to learn a tremendous amount. You got to just do it every day.
Take you to Michigan. This is Joe, line for Democrats. Thanks for waiting.
Hello?
Go ahead, Joe. You're on with Jeffrey Rosen.
Yeah, I think they got to get rid of the Electoral College, but they have to get rid of gerrymandering too, because it wouldn't be independent for all votes to count. And I'm talking about all American voters. But that's what I think.
Jeffrey Rosen, the Electoral College.
Great suggestion. And, it's really interesting, as I said, initially, both our conservative and our progressive teams were open to changing the Electoral College. It was the Libertarians who vetoed. Their basic approach to the project was they wanted to add only one clause after each part of the Constitution, and we mean it. So they didn't want to end the Electoral College. The Electoral College came within a whisker of being amended in the early 1970s when Birch Baugh proposed to replace it with the national popular vote. The amendment was endorsed by President Nixon and by the Democrats, and it would have passed the country quickly, but it was blocked by a few Southern senators in the Senate. So as a result, the Electoral College Amendment wasn't proposed. Now, of course, the question's been polarized, but that is a very thoughtful suggestion.
Windsor Mill, Maryland. Independent Ed, good morning. You're on with Jeffrey Rosen.
Yes, hello.
Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, the question I have for you is, what influence with one of the candidates saying that they are going to abolish, or they intend to abolish the Constitution if elected? What influence will this have on the society?
I didn't hear the very last bit. What influence would it have on the country? Of course, abolishing the Constitution is unacceptable. It's the Constitution is our bedrock. It's what defines we the people. It's our sovereign law, and it's very important to preserve it.
To Chuck in South Carolina, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. What scares me is lack of education about how the whole system works. I think the Constitution has worked very well, for almost 250 years now, but nobody knows what's in it. That's, this year when they abolished that Roe v. Wade, and you had people in power coming out and giving information like this is a woman's right, but it's really not. The 10th Amendment says, anything not enumerated in the Constitution is left to the states, and that's not in there. But they continue this thing of lying to people and getting them all riled up. And the average guy doesn't know because they don't teach it in high school anymore. That's all I got, buddy.
Well, you're so right about the importance of learning the Constitution in high school, starting in middle school. And we're going to take this Constitution 101 course and make it available for middle school students too. Of course, on many constitutional issues, there are legitimate arguments on both sides. And that's why it's so important to read both the majority opinions and the dissents in Supreme Court opinions. I always urge young kids to read the majority opinions and the dissents on our Constitution Center Zooms. Recently, one middle school kid said, "I'm Bill, I'm 11, I'm not sure I can read the dissents," and I encouraged him to do it, and I know he can. But that's the best way that you can hear the arguments on both sides and make up your own mind.
On knowledge of the U.S. Constitution, I want to come back to that Annenberg Public Policy Center poll, specifically asking people to name the rights guaranteed in the First Amendment. Some 74% of respondents, and it's about 1,600 respondents, pretty big poll, could name the freedom of speech. Just 39% saying the freedom of religion, 29% saying freedom of the press, 27% could name the right to assembly, and just 11% the right to petition your government for a redress of grievances. The survey noting that 22% of Americans named the right to bear arms, not in the First Amendment, an issue related to the Second Amendment. But come back to the right to petition your government for a redress of grievances. What does that mean? What did it mean back then, and what does it mean today?
It's such an important question. The right to petition is central. Remember, the Declaration of Independence laments the fact that the colonists' petitions to King George have been repeatedly ignored, and his refusal to respond to them is one of the causes of the revolution. The Constitution protects the right of speech and debate within Congress, and the way to communicate with Congress for the 19th century and the 18th centuries was generally through petition. And people would submit formal petitions before Twitter or social media. That was the way that the citizens made their views clear. So it was very important to protect the right to petition, especially at a time when that was the main means of communicating. In defense of folks who couldn't name the right to petition, the Supreme Court has not given the right a lot of love in recent years because it's kind of folded it in within the right of free speech, and there haven't been a whole lot of petition and debate cases decided recently for that reason. But it's really important and really exciting to learn about the history.
Steve in Ohio, Democrat, good morning. You are next.
Hey, good morning. Am I on?
You are, Steve.
Okay. Hey, I have a question about the Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity. And the question is, now, I served in the military, and there was the thing they taught was that you can refuse an illegal or unlawful order. So now, if that's for me, now, if the president makes an illegal order, that, to me, seems like that in and of itself, even if it's an official act, it's unconstitutional. So I don't understand how the Supreme Court could kind of miss the point that somebody in the military taking orders can refuse an illegal order. So what does that mean with respect to the president being immune to give an illegal order? That seems like they missed the boat big time, Steve, in terms of...
We'll take that question for Jeffrey Rosen.
What an important and significant question. You really put your finger on the central objection that Justice Sonia Sotomayor gave in her dissent, which is that the president could order the assassination of his rival in broad daylight, and the case could not be prosecuted under the majority's ruling. And as you suggest, if members of the military are not permitted to obey illegal orders, how can the president issue one? Now, the court did not say that any order the president issues is legal because the president does it. It's legal, as President Nixon tried to assert. But the court did make it very difficult to find the evidence of illegal official acts because it said that there's a broad area of presumptive immunity related to his official duties that would make it impossible to get the evidence of his conversations with his military advisors. For example, if he was talking to members of the military and discussed the illegal order, then that would be hard to reveal. That's why the decision is so vigorously contested. The majority quoted Alexander Hamilton in talking about the need for energy in the executive. The dissenters noted that Hamilton believed that the president would be amenable to ordinary criminal prosecution for corrupt and illegal acts. And it really is one of the most significant decisions since U.S. v. Nixon. Thank you for that really important insight, sir.
Greenville, Texas. Robert, independent. Good morning.
Good morning. Jeffrey, kind of a strange question here because I've really been trying to call in on an earlier show or earlier episode this morning. But I think the main thing I have that really perplexes me about the Constitution, we set age limits for, how young you have to be to serve in office. And I guess that's to gain experience. And, I feel that's a good qualification, the way it's applied as currently stated. But why has it escaped everybody in the discussions about really getting down to term limits, and not just for Congress, not just for the Senate, we have one for the president, but the Supreme Court, surely there should be term limits there. It should not be lifetime appointments. I don't think any court should have lifetime appointments. I do believe that there should be a parameter there for an age limit to become a Supreme Court justice. I believe an age of 45 or 50 would be acceptable, but terms should not be lifetime appointments. And if we were to set term limits in for Congress, Senate, Supreme Court, I think that would curtail what's really destroying America right now, which is the influence of money and lobbying on people that basically just go for the money to be reelected over and over again, and it turns into like a lifetime appointment. I think term limits would go a long way to solving a lot of what's wrong in American politics. Your thoughts, Jeffrey?
Well, thank you for the suggestions, sir. And you are not alone. As I mentioned, all of our constitutional amendment teams agreed with you and proposed an 18-year term limit. And in fact, Justice Stephen Breyer, who I had the pleasure of interviewing this summer about his new book, endorsed term limits as well. And I think all the current justices are open to it, largely because under most of the proposals, they'd be grandfathered in and could keep serving. But what this is to suggest is out of all the proposals that are on the table, this one has the broadest bipartisan support. It's not a partisan proposal. You could structure term limits so that each president has the opportunity to make one or two appointments, and the current justices are kind of are able to keep serving in a way that would not affect the partisan balance. And it's a great suggestion. Unfortunately, it's just really hard to amend the Constitution, and you'd need 2/3 of both houses of Congress to propose it. And the court has become so polarized that in practice, it might be tough to get the amendment proposed. But if it were, it might well be ratified because it has huge bipartisan support. Thank you for that suggestion.
About 15 minutes left with Jeffrey Rosen of the National Constitution Center. C-SPAN viewers know that you were kind enough to invite the country into the Constitution Center a week ago this evening for the presidential debate. How did that come about? What was that like to host that event there at your facility in Philadelphia?
What an honor and thrill it was to host the presidential debate. The Constitution Center exists to promote civil dialogue about the Constitution and convening the candidates on Independence Mall in Philadelphia with the most inspiring view of Independence Hall in all of America was off the charts. It came about because ABC News reached out to the NCC about a month ago. They had held town halls with President Biden and President Trump in 2020 separately. And they love the space, which is so inspiring. And with just a month to plan, our incredible team, which is I'm just so proud of all of them, was able to put on that amazing debate. So that was how it happened. And now all the world has seen how inspiring the Constitution Center is, what a sacred spot it is on Independence Hall to learn about the Constitution. And that's why I want everyone who's in Philly just to come by. It's free today. You can see it yourself and be inspired to learn about the Constitution.
Do you have any thoughts on the format of debates and what you think it should be? Did you think it worked with a lack of live audience with the mics muted, that whole setup? What was your feel?
As it happened, my wife and I were the only people in the debate room, along with 6 photographers, because of the way that the debate was structured. I'm not sure that that's the best way to view the debate. You miss the live shots and the reactions. So just as someone who had an unusual perspective, it certainly worked for the rest of the country without a live audience. And it also frees up the ability to hold debates in venues that don't have huge audience spaces as well. But I'll leave it up to viewers to decide whether or not the format worked. From our perspective, it was great.
Did you think we missed anything on TV that you were able to see there live, either before or after or during?
No, there were both candidates left the space right after they finished speaking, although Vice President Harris stayed at one break to prepare her closing statement. But aside from that, you saw what we did. In fact, you probably had a better view.
Jim, North Carolina Republican, good morning. You're on with Jeffrey Rosen.
Hey, Big John. Number one, I want to thank you for being unbiased, even though you swing toward the right side. And I do have a question for Mr. Rosen, and I do need to point this out. One of your cohorts, I'm just going to say her name, Mimi. I will not watch your show without you being on, especially if she's on. Because
well, Jim, I tell you, I think all our colleagues here do a good job. But what's your question for Jeffrey Rosen, since we're running short on time?
My question for Jeffrey Rosen is, what's his thoughts, even though it wouldn't take a constitutional amendment to make this happen? It could be an executive order. What about if every child in high school was required to take a 2-semester course before they graduate? One is to know what their state laws are. You commit a crime, this is what happens where you live, okay? And number 2 would be, let's see where I'm going with this. Just give me a second, John. The second semester would be on the Constitution.
Got it. Got your 2 points. Jeffrey Rosen.
Well, mandates are not very popular in America, and they haven't fared well, federal mandates. And the question of whether you can achieve big educational requirements through executive order is also constitutionally contested. However, the idea that it would be great for citizens to learn about their state laws and the Constitution is one I enthusiastically agree with. It's so important, sir, that we just inspire kids to learn all that. And you're so right that most of the law that constrains us in our daily lives comes from the states and not the feds. I would love to put state constitutions online and allow citizens to compare the rights and duties in their state constitution with those of other states throughout the course of American history. And we're thinking about that at the Constitution Center. But the bottom line is now everyone can do exactly what you just suggested, learn about the U.S. Constitution through the great Constitution 101 class that the Constitution Center is co-hosting with Khan Academy, and which is online today. So check it out and let the learning begin.
As somebody whose love of the Constitution comes through the television screen, Mr. Rosen, I wanted to ask you about this story. It's in USA Today, but I've seen it in other places this week. I'll just read it out for you. One of only 8 surviving ratified copies of the U.S. Constitution discovered in an old filing cabinet in North Carolina soon will be auctioned off to the highest bidder. The starting price is $1 million, but is expected to go for much more than that. The North Carolina auction house is facilitating that sale. It's one of only 8 known surviving signed ratified copies of the document. The sale, which is set to take place September 28th, is the last and only other recorded sale since 1891, according to the auction house. What do you think?
I believe that copy of the Constitution is going to be displayed at the NCC today. Seth Kaller, who is trying to sell it, is going to bring it to the NCC. It is indeed rare. It's striking how few of these ratification and original copies circulate. The most recent high-profile Constitution sale was a ratification copy that Ken Griffin bought recently, and that's very exciting to see as well. And the NCC, just a few years ago, displayed one of the 12 surviving copies of the Bill of Rights that showed up in a filing cabinet in New York a few years ago, and which we're sharing with the New York Public Library. So it's really exciting to see these early drafts and a great way to learn about the Constitution.
How many original copies of the Constitution does the NCC have, and how often are they displayed?
We have no original copies. The rarest copy that we have is a copy of the Pennsylvania Packet newspaper, which displayed the printed Constitution the day after it was ratified. And some people think that that's incredibly significant because it was the first copy that we, the people, actually saw. But most of our displays are through borrowed copies. We had recently an incredible exhibit with James Wilson's original handwritten draft of the Constitution. It's one of the rarest and most significant. It's owned by the Pennsylvania Historical Society, and they lent it to us for a while. And we've got a really exciting Constitution coming up for America's 250, which I'll be able to share pretty soon. But it's always exciting to be able to display these drafts when we can. Deborah in Illinois, Democrat, good morning. Thanks for waiting.
Good morning. Please give my horses this morning, but given the tone in the country, with so much kind of hatred and violence occurring, I have a concern about understanding succession, about dividing the country. It's at the point maybe we may need to divide the country. States that are Republican leaning have their own republic, and states that Democratic ideas and leaning have a Democratic state. We can still use the Constitution, but is it possible for states to want to bow out? Is that succession or succeeding from the United States? Because at this time, we're not united. And because of the possibility of violence occurring during the election date, you know, we probably need to separate. I mean, I would want to continue to live around people who didn't want to live around me.
It's Deborah in Illinois.
Such an important and serious question on Constitution Day. Can a state secede from the Union? And Abraham Lincoln's answer was no. He said, we are one nation, and the promise of liberty for all, embraced by all the states during ratification, cannot be unilaterally rejected by a single state. That violates the sovereignty of we, the people of the United States, who made the Constitution. And then the war came, as Lincoln said, and the central constitutional lesson of the Civil War is that unilateral secession is unconstitutional and can't be allowed through violence. That was a proposition that not everyone agreed on initially. Thomas Jefferson had endorsed the possibility of nullification or secession before the Civil War. James Madison disagreed and thought that a single state didn't have the power to secede. And as I said, Lincoln and the Union victory seemed to settle the question in favor of union. So all this is to say that if a single state today, if California or Idaho decided unilaterally to secede, according to our constitutional precedents, that would be unconstitutional and illegal, but it would require federal force. The president would have to send in troops to stop the secession, and war could be the result. A very, very serious question, but let's just, it's on Constitution Day, let's all remind ourselves that Lincoln was right, and George Washington was right, and John Marshall was right, and Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King. We are one nation, one people, we the people of the United States as a whole. The shining value of union and the necessity of preserving and protecting the union it's the single most important lesson of all of American history. Let's not forget it today.
Seems like a good place to end. For much more on the U.S. Constitution, you can go to constitutioncenter.org. And a reminder that that event with Justice Neil Gorsuch happening at 11:15 a.m. Eastern. You can watch it at the Constitution Center website or at cspan.org. We're going to be streaming it live. Jeffrey Rosen, the president and CEO of the National Constitution Center. It is always good to have you, especially on Constitution Day.
Thank you so much. Happy Constitution Day.
Same to you, sir. Coming up in about an hour this morning, we're going to focus on the war in Gaza, a discussion with Anel Sheline of the Quincy Institute for that. But until then, it's our open forum. Any public policy issue, any political issue that you want to talk about, the phone lines are yours to call in. There's phone lines for Democrats, Republicans, and independents on your screen now. Go ahead and start calling in, and we will get to your calls right after the break.